Good day everyone. Now, we will tackle about the variables. What is variable di ay? So, mao ni siya ang meaning sa variables nga naa sa inyong screen. A variable is defined as a quantity or a characteristic that two or more mutually exclusive values of properties by Sevilla et al. It is a characteristics possessed by an object, situation, or people by Adenza et al. 2002. It refers to a characteristic that has two or more mutually exclusive values or properties by Kerlinger 1986. So diri same og meaning sa variables sila Sevilla og Kerlinger. Ang variable kay gi-define siya as a quantity or number ang kadaghanon. Then iyang characteristic kay na siya'y two or more mutually exclusive values or properties. For example, the ages of different persons. So kita mga tao na atay mga different values sa atong size or sukod. Diba lain-lain taog sukod sa atong height, lain-lain pod tag height sa atong weight, sa atong color sa buhok, sa mata o sa atong skin complexion. Sex, for instance, kanaa siya'y two properties which are ang male ug ang female. Then, ang variable pod, ang iyang characteristic kay na possessed by an object, situation, or people. Next, types of variables. Variables are not only characteristics but conditions as well which the researcher manipulates, controls, or observes. There are 5 types of variables, namely independent variables, dependent variables, moderate variable, controlled variable, and intervening variables. First is the independent variables. The independent variables are the conditions or characteristics which are the presumed cause or influence of the existence or non-existence or change in certain phenomena. Ang independent variables kay it is usually manipulated siya. Conditions or objects nga gi-manipulate or gi-control by the researcher in the attempt to determine their relationship to the observed phenomena. Ang independent variables kay gitawag siya og stimulus variable which is chosen by the researcher to determine its relationship to an observed phenomenon. Gitawag pod siya og X variable. Ang independent variable kay gi-considered siya as the predictors of the factors or variables which are ang focus sa study kay ang dependent variables. For examples, example number 1, a researcher wants to determine the effect of drinking coffee on the memory retention among bees and students of USPF. In this example, coffee is the independent variable because it is the stimulus variable that is manipulated. Example number 2, or descriptive research. Suppose the researcher wishes to correlate between mathematics scores and number of hours of study in mathematics to sophomore secondary students at the private schools in Cebu City. The independent variable is number of hours of study in mathematics because it is the stimulus variable that is manipulated. Next, independent variables are categorized into 2 types, treatments and attribute variables. So first, treatment variables are those factors that the researcher manipulates and to which he assigns subjects. There is a treatment variables kay ma-manipulate siya or ma-control sa researcher. Second is attribute variables are those characteristics that cannot be changed by the researcher such as age, sex, and intelligence level, but as independent variables, they can be included or excluded as study variables. Dili sa attribute variables kay dili siya ma-change by the researcher. For example, di ba ako mag-conduct og study, need man ta mag-survey og mga respondent. Then, sa survey, dili jud na mawala ang demographic profile sa atuang mga respondent like about kung silang name, age, sex or gender, sila intelligence level. So dili jud na siya mausab ilahang age, sex or gender, intelligence level. But as independent variable siya, pwede siya ma-include or ma-exclude as study variables sa ilahang research. Next, the dependent variables. The dependent variables are the conditions or characteristics which are influenced by the independent variables. Ang dependent variables kay usually affected siya by the manipulation or control of the independent variable. Ang dependent variables kay gitawag siya og response variable which is observed and measured to determine the effect of the independent variable. Gitawag pod siya og Y variable. The dependent variables are the outcomes, effects, or results which are the focus of the investigation. Their behavior or status as influenced by independent variables is what a researcher will try to explain. For examples, example number 1, taking the previous example. Sa katuning example sa independent variable. Ang atong dependent variable kay ang memory retention because it changes as a result of variations in drinking coffee. Example number 2. For instance, the researcher wishes to correlate between mathematics scores and number of hours of study in mathematics to sophomore secondary students at the private schools in Cebu City. So ato ang dependent variable kay ang mathematics scores because it is the response variable where all changes when the independent variable number of hours in study varies. Next, moderate variable. This is a secondary or special type of variable chosen by the researcher to determine if it alters or modifies the relationships between the independent and dependent variables. Kani siya nga variable kay gipili ni siya sa researcher to investigate or to determine whether nabay changes or ma-modifies ba ang relationships between the independent variables and dependent variables. For example, suppose the researcher wishes to conduct a study on the effects of the independent variable A on the dependent variable B, but suspects that a third factor C alters or modifies the relationship between A and B, then C is considered as moderator variable. Next, control variable. This is a variable controlled by the research in which the effects can be neutralized by eliminating or removing the variable. I think very understandable na kay ni siya nga variable kay kani siya nga variable gi-control ni siya by the researcher in order to neutralize its effects on the relationship between sa independent variables and dependent variables. For example, suppose the researcher wishes to determine the effect of A or independent variable on B or dependent variable. He may control D or controlled variable because he cannot do many variables simultaneously. In other words, he may remove or eliminate D to neutralize the effects. Controlled variable guarantees to have no moderating effect on the relationship between A and B. Next, intervening variables. This variable intrudes or interferes with the independent variable and dependent variable, but its effects can either reinforce or weaken the independent and dependent variables. Kani siya nga variable kay intrudes or interferes siya with the independent variable and dependent variable. Silbig kani siya, nakasamok ni siya sa independent variable and dependent variable. But, bisag nakasamok siya kay naa siya'y reinforce or weaken. Silbig, makatabang gyapon siya sa independent and dependent variables. This variable cannot be controlled and measured directly but which may have an important effect upon the outcome of measurement. They are called modifying variables because they intervene between the cause and the effect. For example, suppose the researcher wishes to correlate between mathematics scores and number of hours of study in mathematics to sophomore secondary students at the private schools in Cebu City. But But it is possible that age, gender, socioeconomic status, and attitudes toward study might have an effect on mathematics scores. Next, Figure 1 shows the paradigm of independent variable, intervening variables, and dependent variable on correlate between mathematics scores and number of hours of study in mathematics as perceived by sophomore secondary students in private schools in Cebu City. So, ato ang independent variable which is ang number of hours of study. Then, ang intervening variables kay age, gender, socioeconomic status, and attitudes. Then, ang dependent variable which is ang mathematics scores. Next, extraneous variables are those variables which are not controlled or manipulated by the researcher but which may have a significant influence on the results of a study. They are also known as exogenous variables. As much as possible, the researcher has to have control over them. If beyond control, they should be taken into account in the analysis and interpretation of study result. Bess and Kahn, 1989, noted that in order for an extraneous variable to confound the result of a study, it must be correlated strongly enough with both the independent and the dependent variables that its influence can be mistaken for that of the independent variables. Dili sa extraneous variables kay dili siya ma-controlled or ma-manipulated by the researcher, but as much as possible dapat gid siya ma-control. For example, ato ang independent variable which is ang educational qualification. Then ato ang intervening variables kay ang age, gender, civil status, experiences, values, and attitudes towards work. Then ato ang dependent variable which is ang performance. Another example, ato ang independent variable which is ang NCEE percentile rank. Then ato ang intervening variables kay age, gender, socioeconomic background, values, and attitudes towards study. Then ato ang dependent variable which is ang achievement. Next, relationship between variables. To say that variables x and y are related implies that they vary together. That is, a change in x is accompanied by a change in y and vice versa. This variation is known as concomitant variation or correlation. For instance, if one finds that as education increases, income also increases, then the variables education and income are related or correlated. However, if education increases but there is no recognizable pattern of change in income level, one can conclude that education and income are not correlated. Diri ang ato ang x variable kay ang independent variables. Then ato ang y variable kay ang dependent variables. Sila duha kay related sila. It means that they change together. If si x variable mo increase, so si y variable also mo increase. If si x variable mo decrease, so si y variable also mo decrease. So sa ilang relationship duha gitawag og correlation or concomitant variation. Like diri sa example, let's say ang researcher ni study sila about relationship between education and income level. If ang education level na increase, so ang income level also mo increase. Then ang variables nga education and income level na considered sila to be related or correlated. However, if ang education level mo increase but wala siya na recognizable or noticeable change in income level, then ang education and income are not considered to be correlated. Next, operational definitions and indicators. So first is operational definitions of variables are usually given under section of definitions of terms. There are some studies, however, which do not only contain operational definition of variables but stipulate the indicator or indicators of each study variables on the basis of which they are measured. while indicators of study variables should be determined and defined clearly at the early stage of the research process because failure to do so will create problems in the generation, processing, and analysis of data. Para mas masabtan, natay mga examples sa indicators of study variables. Below are the variables and their corresponding indicator of the study by Ardalis 1990 on the Community and Household Profile Selected Comprehensive Agrarian Reform Program or CARP areas in Negros Occidental and process documentation of community organizing activities. For example, sa tuang variables, first kay ang household type, iyahang indicators kay household composition. Next, household size, iyahang indicators kay absolute number. Next, number of children, iyahang indicators kay absolute number gihapon. Next, dependent burden, iyang indicators kay ratio of non-working to working members. Next, sources of income, iyahang indicators kay NEDA employment categories. Next, ang income, iyang indicators kay total monthly earnings in cash and kind, and so on. Next, theoretical framework or paradigm. Having constructed or formulated the research objectives, the next stage in the research process is the construction of the research paradigm or framework of the study. Basic to the research paradigm is the theory, which is a set of concepts and their relation, which explains, predicts, and interprets how a particular phenomenon exists and operates. Snow 1973 defines a theory as a symbolic construction designed to bring generalizable facts or laws into systematic connection. Marshall 1989 explains theory as a set of related propositions that suggest why events occur in the manner they do. Theory to Kerlinger 1986 is a set of interrelated constructs or concepts, definitions, and propositions that presents a systematic view of phenomenon by specifying relations among variables with the purpose of explaining and predicting phenomenon. From these definitions, natay duha ka elements of the theory can be deduced, namely, first, a set of units, facts, concepts, variables, and second, a system of relationships among the units. And lastly, the nature of the status of theory varies quite considerably according to the area of discipline. Some theories, as in the natural sciences, are highly sophisticated, while others, like those in the field of education, are simple because they are in the early stage of formulation. Next, to determine whether a theory is good or not, Molly 1978 suggests the following criteria. So first, a theoretical system must permit deduction that can be tested empirically. That is, it must provide the means for its confirmation or rejection. So diri ang theoretical system dapat permit deduction siya nga matest siya through empirical research. Dapat na siya confirmation or rejection sa inyuhang na-claim based on evidence. Second, a theory must be compatible with both observation and previously validated theories. It must be grounded on empirical data that have been verified and must rest on postulates and hypotheses. Diri kay ang theory dapat compatible siya. When we say compatible, na siya common idea sa mga theory. Kung dili parehas imong theory, walay gamit imong theory. Silbig kani siya back up siya to justify sa imong theory. And third, theories must be stated in simple terms. The theory is best that explains the most in the simplest way. This is the law of parsimony. Diri kay ang imong theory dapat stated ra siya in simple terms because the simpler a theory is, the easier it is to understand and use. Next, the roles or functions of theory in research are as follows by Molly 1978. So first, it helps to make research more productive in that it organizes number of and unsorted facts, laws, concepts, constructs principles into a meaningful and manageable form. Second, it can act as a guide to discovering facts. Third, it identifies gaps to be investigated, crucial aspects on which focus, and major questions to be answered. Fourth, it can stimulate research in areas that warrant study. And fifth, it can help connect studies and can facilitate the interpretation, the larger meaning of research findings. Next, paradigm or framework. The research paradigm or framework of the study is required of many investigations, particularly those which are meant to meet the thesis and dissertation requirements for a graduate degree, and specifically those which are causal or relational in nature. It is a perspective or frame of reference for viewing the social world consisting of a set of concepts and assumptions by Bailey 1987. The research paradigm or framework is a useful device in organizing existing data meaningfully in a specific area of investigation. It is also useful in interpreting, criticizing, and unifying established scientific laws, modifying them in the face of unanticipated data, guiding the discovery of new and more powerful generalizations. Then, according to Mercado 1977, the research paradigm or framework does not only explain why the problem under study exists, but also helps the researcher see clearly the variables that should be measured and provides a general framework which can guide him in the analysis of data. Next, the research paradigm has three levels, namely theoretical, conceptual, and operational. First, theoretical paradigm. The theoretical paradigm makes use of a theory or theories in explaining why a certain phenomenon exists and how the various factors which brought about the phenomenon are interrelated. It uses abstract concepts, although in some instances it is a combination of abstract and well-defined concepts, but more of the former. A researcher may adopt existing theories on which to anchor or base his particular study. Diri sa theoretical paradigm, ang iyang gamit kay abstract concepts. Combination siya sa abstract and well-defined concepts. Diri ang researcher pwede sila mo adapt og mga na-exist nga mga theories on which mao to ilahang i-anchor or basihan sa ilahang study. Second, conceptual paradigm. The conceptual paradigm has the same functions as the theoretical paradigm. The difference lies in the type of concepts which they use. While the theoretical paradigm uses abstract concepts, the conceptual paradigm uses constructs which are specific or well-defined concepts. Diri sa conceptual paradigm kay same functions ra siya sa theoretical paradigm. Ang ilahang difference lang kay ilahang type of concepts nga ilang gigamit. Ang theoretical paradigm ang gigamit kay abstract concepts, while sa conceptual paradigm ang gigamit kay construct, which are specific iyahang concepts. And third is operational paradigm. The operational paradigm is the level where the concepts used are not only defined as they are used in the study but are measurable as well. It is the measurability of concepts that distinguishes the operational paradigm from the theoretical and the conceptual paradigms. It is the same element which makes it more useful than the two others. The meanings of concepts in operational paradigm are similar to the operational definition of terms. Diri sa operational paradigm kay more useful siya than the two others, which are the theoretical paradigm and conceptual paradigm. Kay iyang focus kay using concepts that can be measured. This means that the concepts used in the operational paradigm are not only defined, but they can also be observed and measured in a specific way. Then, kaning operational paradigm kay similar siya sa operational definition of terms. Next, the following is an illustration adapted from Mercado's book 1977, which shows 3 levels of the research paradigm. So, mo na siya ang illustration. Naatay 3 levels of the research paradigm: independent variable, intervening variables, and dependent variables. So, first is theoretical paradigm. Iyang independent variable kay communication. Intervening variable kay characteristics, then dependent variable kay learning. Second level of the research paradigm, which is ang conceptual paradigm. Independent variable niya kay mass media exposure. Intervening variables niya kay age, sex, civil status, education, religion, etc. And dependent variable niya kay political knowledge. And third level of the research paradigm, which is ang operational paradigm. Independent variable niya kay number of hours spent in listening to political radio programs. Intervening variables niya kay age, sex, civil status, education, religion, etc. Then dependent variable niya kay score in a test on political knowledge. Finally, Pulido's 1986 schematic diagram, Figure 2, shows the hypothesized relationships among variables covered in her study of mothers' infant feeding practices. So, mano siyang example sa schematic diagram of hypothesized relationships among independent and dependent variables. So, diri naatay independent variables, which are economic factors, social factors, and psychological factors. Then, gi-connect siya sa dependent variable, which is ang feeding practices, ang breastfeeding, bottle feeding, and mixed feeding. By the way, sa variables DI, na mga situations do nga ang characteristic niya kay dili variable. Although by nature siya nga na siya more than one property or value. 6 for instance, dili siya variable sa imong study where ang imong target population is all women ra. Same ra na siya sa race. Ang race dili siya variable sa imong study where only Filipinos ra ang imuhang gi-involved. Natay mga personal variables are in terms of age, gender, civil status, and educational attainment. Any questions? Alright, so that ends my presentation. Thank you so much everyone for listening, and may God bless us always.